include housing and include a new church. Planning permission was recently granted for one at Lane Cove. Actually, I'm joined by our town planner, Michael Rowe. He could probably answer that question better than I could.
Okay, thank you. No more questions? Thank you for coming along and speaking. And so the next speaker is Michael Rowe, Director from Beam Planning, the applicant's town planning representative.
Good evening, panel. I've got a speech but I've also I can sense there are all questions. I might do the speech, and then if there's more questions or things that flow out of that, I can do those. If that sounds good. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this evening. We naturally strongly support the recommendation from Council and its assessment. As Tom's spoken to, the demolition DA that's before you facilitates early works to commence on site to assist the delivery of some very significant social and affordable housing that also includes a new church and community facilities. The assessing officer's report provides a very clear history of the consideration regarding the site's heritage significance, and I encourage you to get into the detail of that and some of that reporting, because we've heard a selective history of what has happened on this site. Fundamentally, both at a political and at a technical level, the listing of this building has not been supported on numerous occasions, and there's a reason for that. The heritage demolition report that was submitted with the DA is very comprehensive, and we've got Dolph from GBA here to answer technical heritage questions if that's of assistance. And it was supported by a peer review prepared by Weir Phillips. The department ultimately considered the heritage significance most recently as part of the TOD process, and then in Council's assessment that's before you, they've also considered it. And when you objectively consider the significance of this building through New South Wales Heritage Office's established framework for assessing heritage significance, the building does not meet any of the threshold significance required for a heritage listing. And I give like a planner's summary kind of delving into what's in the detail of the report. And I do encourage you, if you haven't read that, to get into that detail. But the architect McPherson, he was considered to be a journeyman architect rather than an important, innovative or influential one. And the building was constructed in 1938. It didn't actually reflect his original designs. The church was completed with a simplified facade. They had no bell tower, and none of the surrounding buildings that were part of the design were constructed. Then a major addition was done in 1961, where they demolished the front of the building and they replaced it with a completely different architectural style. We don't know the extent of McPherson was involved in that process at all, and it was replaced with a Romanesque facade with a modernist post-war ecclesiastical style. So we have two completely different styles coming together, and if you come from a heritage perspective, that's what might appear a pretty building to some in the street, but from a purely heritage objective perspective, it was obviously significantly different in the styles that came in the 60s. The church is not important in demonstrating the characteristics of any of the architectural styles. Combination of the two in this case certainly doesn't result in an aesthetic or creative or technical importance of significance. The social, cultural and spiritual relationship between the congregation and St Paul's is also not unusual. Every place of worship typically has some level of connection with the community. If I could have the 2 minutes, please, Chair. When you go through all of those detailed criteria about the building, you can see why multiple times this has been considered but ultimately determined not to be heritage listed. However, and as Tom pointed to, this building is important to members of the community. We've heard that tonight, and for this church, that's important to the church as well. And there are lots of the people who are within the church community that are supportive. They didn't want it to be a us first community. It's important for the church and they do love the members of the community, even though they have a difference of opinion about what's the future of this site. And so we've worked with council. We've developed the salvage plan, and we think that the recommended conditions are entirely appropriate. And I think here strike the balance between preserving the memory of this building commensurate with its true heritage significance. We don't want it to stop the delivery of the social infrastructure and the opportunity for this building to remain relevant and useful to the Bankstown community and for this church to continue to have an impact into the future. that's what this proposal was about for the church and for the Sydney diocese. And so what is proposed is trying to find that balance between preserving that memory in a way that's appropriate, but still allowing this to happen. And there's been a long strategic process to get to where we are. The significance of the building has been considered on multiple occasions, but ultimately determined not to list the building. And so accordingly, we request that the DA be approved, consistent with Council's recommendation, assessed in accordance with the statutory framework that's before us, and is going to facilitate a great outcome for the Bankstown community, not to mention significant affordable housing and community facilities. Thank you.
To check if you have a question. Okay, you reference to the delivery of community facilities and the kind of continued function as part of communities. Very much, it's not this application. It's very much reliant on the SSD application, which includes, I haven't had reason to look at it in detail, but I'm told it includes multi-purpose facilities for that purpose. We've heard tonight that it is the intent of the Sydney diocese. I was going to check which one it is, that it is intended to maintain that, I'm just going to say church facility on site. That's part of the application.
Yeah, so
no intention to amend that or change it?
No, so there's a couple of things to help you with that. Is first and foremost, the LEP clause that was drafted, there's a site-specific clause for St Paul's, and that you can't achieve the FSR and uplift and height without delivering the community facilities and the place of public worship on site. And so, whilst yes, it's in a separate DA, there's, I guess, a level of certainty within the planning framework to ensure that that outcome is going to be delivered. Originally, when the TOD came in, it was just a community facility, and that was raised concern for the diocese about the fact that it's really important to them that the church is actually maintained on site. They have a strategic plan that's obviously it's publicly available, but an internal document about what is their broader strategic vision for Sydney and how they're going to use the property to do their missional purposes. And part of that is identifying places like Bankstown, which has enormous growth plan for it, and going, the current facilities on site don't reflect what we see the future strategic vision for Bankstown. And we need facilities that are aligned with the scale of the population that's moving to these areas. And so for them, this is one of those, they have what they call the pilot project, and to your other question, Alison, about what are the other examples of this has happened, it hasn't really happened in the Sydney diocese. This is a pilot project for them of how do we look at land that's strategically located and utilise it. We've got obviously public transport infrastructure for our missional purposes so that we can continue to do what we do as a church in all the ways that that's encompassed, and then also use the capacity. So from some of the public speakers that this is a project motivated by greed. This project is the residential component on top of this. There's a minister's dwelling, and outside of the minister's dwelling, like the rectory house, which is an apartment within the building, is 100%, 185 social and affordable housing dwellings. This is not motivated by greed. If there was, they would develop it for profit with build-to-sell apartments or in a build-to-rent scheme. This is actually about how do we use our assets to care for the community in a holistic manner.
Just to follow up on that, we heard that, and maybe I should ask Tom about this, but it's that SSD application is an application that has tied to some federal funding, and in my experience, that federal funding has time frames and requirements. Do you know what they are for that project?
Tom may be better at answering that question, but that has been,
generally,
as I understand it, the reason why we separate out the demolition DA was because we're in a situation where the SSD, as you know, has a period of time and there's a lot of things that have to be considered. And most of the projects that got HAP funding already had approvals in place. This project didn't. And so there's been a lot of time pressure on the project team to get this application because of Housing Australia's requirements around the timing of delivery and when they have to have the dwellings online, which all works back from elections and timeframes about dwellings for the housing accord. And so it has been very much a driver for this project, and why we separate out the DA was to allow for works to start on site to, as Tom mentioned, ease the stress on the construction program, working back from when Housing Australia need this to be delivered.
I think just to explain some of the questions is that this DA is just for demolition only, so it's incumbent upon us as a panel to turn our minds very much to the question of heritage. But this DA doesn't go to what else should be on the site, so that's very, very useful to understand the provisions in the LEP, which aren't in this report, that actually, as I understand what you've said, is incumbent upon any application on that site to deliver a place of public worship in some way, shape or form.
That's correct.
And that's of the current application.
Yep.
And I just think for the benefit of the audience, I would imagine that this information that has been delivered is probably giving you a degree of comfort. Anyway.
You don't happen to have the LEP clause handy, do you?
I don't have it to hand, but do you have a question on it? Because I'm relatively familiar with it.
So was it a site specific?
It's a site specific one. If you have does council have the LEP to hand, or we can?
We can ask the council
it's
afterwards in the briefing.
It's
I just thought if you had it handy.
St Paul's
Thank you.
Anglican Church.
But it's in the LEP. It's not in
the
set
LEP.
clause, yeah.
It's 6 point something.
6 point something. Thank you.
Yeah.
So no more questions. That was our last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, we do have the applicant's heritage expert here. If there were any questions, just said they're available for any question.
Maybe one follow-up. In terms of, again, it's incumbent on us to turn our minds to the heritage aspects, and part of that consideration of demolition is, and there's been elements that have been identified in our salvage report. It's just wondering whether there's been an interpretation strategy or a draft form of that prepared for the SSD. Again, it's not something that we've gone down that rabbit hole on. I do note that the heritage report does recommend it, and
Yes.
that's in this application.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to understand the linkage, knowing full, as I said, that the reason you've put in a separate application for demolition, but you do have a current application in that is considering it holistically. Just wondering where that perhaps the heritage person might be able to answer it, where the interpretation strategies are at, if anywhere.
It's certainly the intention, but in that sequence of timing, and appreciate the challenge where you've got demolition without the DA in front of you, the intention was that, from memory, is that the interpretation strategy, which wasn't lodged with the exhibition, would be a condition of the SSD. I think that's right. People nodding at me. So there's certainly the intention for it to be prepared, but the sequence of that was about tied to the approval of the building.